Okay, uh, we should be recording now, so we'll get underway here. So we're going to look now at our third chapter, the third uh, adventure we go on with this. And what we're looking at now is very different from anything else we've done in the past, in the sense that it's not a battle; it's an entire uh, two wars. So the U.S. Civil War in 1860s and the Russian Civil War in 1918-22. And again, it's interesting in the sense that we're looking at a much broader view. But again, we're going to use the comparative comparison vehicle. And in that regard, we're going to be picking particular issues that, quite frankly, I find interesting. And in this case, what is absolutely fascinating to me is Lincoln Lenin. I never thought I would be comparing Lincoln to Lenin, but it's fascinating to see the similarities and the contrasts. So let's take a look at what we have here. First, let's take a kind of deep dive into the comparison of the two countries. Um, it's interesting to lay this out as we go through the analysis. And here you can see the size of the United States versus the size of Russia. The US is a huge country, one of the largest in the world, but the Soviet Union, Russia, is the largest. It spans 11 time zones. So it's huge, but we're both geographically huge. Um, the difference in the population over time is interesting. If you look here, if we go to 1861, the time of our revolution, the Russian Empire up here, 75 million, the American, 30 million. So twice the size of the United States. Go to 1918, and now we have, um, they broke it down as the Red Army and the White Army, which is kind of interesting. But America, 113 million. So a change in the relative size. And of course, this will go on, and this becomes a major factor in the Cold War. And it's something that we look at in my Cold War class. Now, another one that is important in this is looking at the population density. And we want to look at this primarily in relationship to 1860. And here you see the population density of the North so much greater than the South. South, agrarian agriculture, cotton growing. Here is the burgeoning industrial Northeast and the Midwest. All of these areas growing. And the South politically able to dominate because of the structure of the U.S. Senate, in the sense that each state gets two representatives. Here in the Russia, you see a slightly different parallel. You see Petrograd, St. Petersburg, a population center. You see Moscow, a population center. You see some of what we see as Ukraine, uh, uh, a population center over here, but vast numbers of rural people scattered about. So it's a much, much larger rural population, and the same down in the Caucasus. And then out in Siberia, a very, very slight population. And that drives us forward. And here, if we look at GDP, where we are with the GDP, if we go to 1861, you see the United States, and you see the Russian Empire, a profound difference in the GDP. And if you go to 1918, you see then a total change in what is the situation. And you see the United States has just taken off into 60 billion. And, you know, if you look for the Russian Empire down here, a fraction, a tenth of what the US. So a tremendous change in the GDP. And another factor we want to look at is the kind of quality of life. Look at the literacy rate in 1861. And here you have the literacy rate of uh, Russia, Russia at 12, and the United States at 94 percent. And at this point in time, the U.S. has the highest literacy rate in the country. But notice the average. This is the North. This is the average. And if you go to the South, to the slaves, it brings down. So the Southern literacy rate is much, much below the Northern rate. And that becomes a tremendous divide in what goes on. And we go to 1918. Germany now has gone ahead of the U.S. in the literacy rate, but Russia is still almost a third of what the literacy rate. So the quality of life in that particular is very different. And another factor I want to take a look at is mobility. Uh, um, the United States has always been an incredibly mobile society, uniquely mobile in what it does and how it does it. And it's a great economic boon to the society, as much in 1861, 1918 as it is in 2026. And again, if you break out the North, a high mobility rate. If you bring in the South and you bring in the average, what the South doesn't have anywhere near the mobility. And mobility is kind of a willingness to change, and it shows that the South is really not an area that in 1861 is very anxious to change. And again, Russia, I don't even think the slaves have been, the serfs have been released yet. So very, very paltry mobility rate there. And now if we go to 1918, the year of the Russian Revolution, again, the United States has a very, very high mobility rate, and Russia a very, very low mobility rate. So this tells us a lot about the willingness of the society to accept change and to go forward with a change. So those are a kind of a quick demographic overviews of the two sides. Now, as we've said before in looking at these analyses we're doing of the American way of war, we're not going to attempt to do a narration of the war or of the battles we examine, because as I've said before, YouTube is filled with those narrations. Well, the internet is filled with those narrations, and we don't need to replicate that or go after that. But in comparing these two civil wars, I want to isolate out a number of battles and compare those battles. And so we're going to look at four key battles. And the first one we're going to isolate out is when was the first shot fired? When did the war begin? And the premise that we're going on is that the first battle basically frames the war and where we're going. The second uh, category we're going to look at that is so very, very important is which is the watershed battle? What is the battle that tells us that the tide has turned and that the winning side has shown its hand and now will dominate from henceforward? In our World War II in the Pacific, it's clearly the Battle of Midway. Some would argue for Guadalcanal, but I would certainly agree with Midway. On the Eastern Front, Stalingrad is generally assumed to be the watershed battle. Some would say Moscow. Some would even say Kursk, but I think Stalingrad is the clear winner. And then the other uh, attribute we're looking for is what was the worst loss of the war? And in looking at the loss, we're in many, many cases, when a nation loses a war, it becomes a key change agent in how the war goes forward, because a key function of defining a winning side is the winning side learning from its mistake and changing in relationship to those defeats and making itself greater as a result of that. in the American Revolution. I think we could probably say that the Washington's defeat at the Battle of Long Island was a key change agent for him. He learned an awful lot from that battle and went on to, to change from it. And then the last category we're going to look at is the final battle. What is the final blow of the war, and how does that battle then frame portend what's coming in the future? And it's kind of interesting to look at these battles within this matrix. And so, what we're looking at here is Fort Sumter in April of 1861, and this is I'm accepting as the first battle. And what we have here is we have um, Lincoln was elected in November of 1860. And remember, the lame duck period is very, very long during this time period. So the new president is not inaugurated until March, early March. So Buchanan is the president for months and months and months. And he is incredibly passive in what he does. So what has happened is that the Confederate forces, as they secede, and Fort Sumter is in South Carolina, the first state to secede, to announce its secession. They are now going to be seizing federal offices. They're going to seize post offices. They're going to, in many cases, seize military bases. And Buchanan isn't doing anything about it. Now, Sumter is different in the sense that it isn't contiguously connected to the land, so it isn't something that they can easily enter. And when Lincoln finally comes to office and sends a relief expedition to Fort Sumter, the 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 Confederates have said that that's not acceptable, and so when that relief uh, convoy appears, they open fire, and this begins um, the shelling that goes on. And now this becomes very, very important in the war because it now makes very, very clear that there is not a compromise. Now we're at war. There's an more enormous mobilization of public opinion. Remember, we just showed you charts showing you the literacy of the North. And the North has a very, very large newspaper publication industry. And so the people are very attuned to what's going on. And the press publicizes exactly what's going on. And there's an incredible mobilization. And as happened after Pearl Harbor. There's a tremendous boom of enlistment with people rushing forward to enlist and join the Union forces. And now we divide geographically. So we have the southern states lining up, and then the northern states, and then the border states that will be contended against. And Lincoln will have to move for them. And of course, this takes place in South Carolina, in Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. Charleston's an absolutely gorgeous city. Now, for the Russian side, for the Bolshevik side, it's kind of interesting tale in its own way. Uh, what is happening here is that in World War One, the Czechs sent a large legion to support the Russian troops in their battle with Germany. Tens of thousands. I don't remember the large number, but a large, large number. And they're kind of stuck in Russia as the revolution goes on, and they want to get out and they want to uh, gain exit rights out of Siberia. And Trotsky doesn't like having that many armed people in the country. So he tries to disarm them, and in attempting to disarm them, they rise in rebellion and they attack the Bolsheviks and they seize the, the Siberian rail system. Um, so what happens is you now have internationalization, you have gun fired, and you have the Bolsheviks, and you have anti-Bolshevik forces. The other part of this, it's really, really important, is it internationalizes the conflict from the first moments of the conflict. So Japan will send in substantial number of troops into Siberia. The British will have troops in the French will have forces, and even the United States. President Wilson sends in troops, and it also portends the nature of the war that is so different from the nature of the war in the United States. In that, as you can see in this, in all these images again are Gemini generated. Um, the war is fought around railroads, and so it isn't territory because there's hardly any roads whatsoever out here, across here. And so the only way to get across is with railroads. So the battles are going to be about the railroads and seizing the railroads and covering the railroads. And here you can see where this is all taking place. Here's a characterization of the Trans-Siberian Railroad and built after the turn of the century. And here's one of these idiot mistakes that the AI always makes. Here's Omsk put down twice, and they're happening here in Chelyabinsk. And so it's a long way from Moscow, but it's in the Ural Mountains. And they go as far as Samara, I believe, which is on the Volga River. It should be the Volga River right here. This is the Don over here. And so this is a major threat to the Bolsheviks, and they now have to contend against it. So uh, the the battles are framed. Here's an armored car, and here's Sumner and the armored train, and we'll talk more about the armored trains later. And the political crisis had come before the war, and now the war erupts, and now we're into organized violence. And what had been just a political crisis explodes now into full-scale combat. And Lincoln sets out the call for volunteers, and that sets up the call for secession, the confirmation of secession. Trotsky had ordered the Legion to disarm. They refused. They seized the railways and revolution. And the Bolsheviks realized now they now have to form an army and get forth. And so what happens, as I said, you have mass numbers of uh, recruits coming forward, a large number of recruiting coming forward and agreeing to join. And you have in Russia opposing governments set up contending against you. And you have Trotsky creating the Red Army from de novo. There's nothing there. And then the basic strategies are laid out. The Union strategy, Anaconda, to blockade the Confederate States. The effort will be to separate the Mississippi and then to close them in. And then in the Soviets, as I said, the rail lines will be what are absolutely essential in the development of this, and the battle will be over the rail lines and driving into these areas that are incredibly lightly populated, and for all practical purposes, no roads. So the attack on the flag is a motivating force in the United States. The intervention of capitalist nations, the bête noire of the socialists or the communists, uh, again unifies and marshals the forces on the Bolshevik side. Uh, and civil war is there ignited on both sides. Now let's go to the next set or categories of battles, and this again is a fascinating one. And this is the watershed battles. Who is winning, who appears to be winning, and what comes from that uh, change of the tide. And as I said before, well, I forget if I said it before, but a common assessment is that it could be Gettysburg in the Civil War, it could be Vicksburg. Uh, I overwhelmingly think of Vicksburg because the victory at Gettysburg is ambiguous in the sense that Meade lets Lee get away. At Vicksburg, there's no ambiguity. The Confederate forces are annihilated. I mean, they're they're destroyed root and branch, and they're captured and destroyed. Pemberton has no army. There's nothing left when Grant gets finished with it. So I unambiguously see Vicksburg as the winning battle. Now, let me go to the map, because the map shows what Grant does. What Grant does here is incredible, absolutely incredible. So here's Vicksburg here. He's coming from the north, the Western forces, and he tries a numerous attacks across here from the north. And this is all bayou country, very, very broken up country. And the fortifications of the Vicksburg are strong in the north. And Grant tries and can't do it. Then he decides he's going to go here on the west side, the west shore of the Mississippi. And this again is incredible swampland. They actually try to build a canal across here to bypass Vicksburg, but that fails as well. But it's the tenacity of Grant that's extraordinary because he tries and tries and tries and tries, but he never quits. I mean, he absolutely never quits. McClellan would have quit with the first wet foot that he had, and he finally finds a way to make it down with his forces around Vicksburg down south. Now, the other part of that that is so incredibly important is what he does, and it's shown in this picture here. Farragut is the admiral that is in charge of the uh, Union Navy, and he is north with Grant, and he, in fact, is one of the major logistics trains of Grant, pulling the supplies from up north down here. And so Grant, Farragut decides he's going to run. Here are the batteries up here on the bluffs, the Confederate batteries looking down. This is why they blockaded the river so effectively. But what Farragut does, you can see here in the image, that he loads bales of cotton on the decks of his ships so that they're fortified. They're not ironclad yet, they're kind of cotton clad, but it works. But the other thing he discovers is that the channel of the river is on the east shoreline here, close to shore. And the Confederates, when they built their batteries, aimed them mid-river, set them mid-river, and they didn't have them set up so that they could decline enough to bring fire on this eastern shoreline channel. And so Farragut comes down and he runs here, and I'm not sure he loses any ships at all. I mean, he may have some that are hit by gunfire, but none at all. But the bottom line is, let me finish with what happens here. Farragut runs down here. He meets Grant down here. He ferries Grant's forces across the river. Grant is now on the same east shore as Vicksburg. And the assumption is that he's going to drive right up here, and the Confederates are kind of waiting for him. But he he surprises everybody by driving over here to Jackson, where Johnston is coming down with Confederate forces to support Vicksburg. And Grant defeats Johnston, concentrates on him, and then drives west from Jackson, encountering the Confederates in several battles, defeating them in each battle as they move, and then finally invests Vicksburg and puts the siege works around Vicksburg. And over a period of time, just in classical siege work, not dissimilar to what Washington did at Yorktown, forces Pemberton to eventually surrender. So it's an incredible victory, and the Union then goes on. There's ups and downs. Lee is incredibly inventive and skilled and keeps the war going for years. But Lincoln recognizes the skill in Grant and brings Grant east, and then that begins the downfall. Now, the Watershed battle in the Russian Civil War is Denikin's attack on Moscow. So in 1919, there are white leaders uh, scattered all around the Bolshevik forces. There's the Bolsheviks ascended in Moscow, Petrograd, St. Petersburg, and those are the two main railroad hubs, and they contend hold those, and those are the major industrial areas of Russia as well. So that's their strength, and they have white forces coming up from the south here at the Black Sea. They have white forces coming in from Siberia. They have white forces coming in from the north. They have white forces coming in from the Baltic region, and they're uncoordinated and separated by large areas. And so Denikin is driving to get to Moscow, and this is in October of 1919, and he drives, and Moscow is here, and he comes up, and he's getting close. Here's Kiev over here to orient it, and Odessa. Tsaritsyn here is what's now Volgograd or Stalingrad, in Saratov. This is where actually some of the I think some of the Czech forces got as far as here. This is the Volga, and he drives here, and he fails. He's pinched off and defeated, and that's the furthest reach of the white forces. That's as close as they got to having a killing force going on, and it fails. And so then we can look at what tells these, and we talk about the Lincoln is just elated that they now have the Mississippi, and now the Mississippi flows unvexed, as he says, to the sea, and so now the Union forces, the Union economy can now ship out of New Orleans, and it severs, and we'll see that in a minute. Uh, so we see the collapse of the Confederates, and uh, Lee will have some successes, but it's timely. And we see here that Denikin's attempt is pinched off and fails, and the Bolsheviks win there. And here you have Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri now separated from the rest of the Confederacy, and the concept of Anaconda and separating and surrounding the Confederates is now in place, and will continue from there. And here you see the Bolsheviks having their center here at Moscow, and their ability to move against these white forces coming at them from so many different directions. And that will be powerful. And the, the tale, as we've already said, watershed battles don't mean that war is over. It's kind of like Churchill's French phrase. It's not the end of the beginning, but it's the end of the middle. We now have a clear trajectory of how it's going to move, and it kind of moves inexorably from that point. A lot of people die before it ends, but it is moving inexorably forward. All right, why don't we pause here and take a break so we can pass this one up, and then we'll come back and finish this next.